Why hello there, my name is Erin Moriarty, and today we're going to discuss the top signs that I should have known that I was gay. And one of the biggest reasons that I'm sharing this is because a lot of people realize that they are gay or that they are bi later in life. It's not as clear-cut and simple of a process as a lot of people in society would make you think it is, and every time I've talked about this in the past, it has kind of jogged things in other people's minds and made them rethink their own identity. So I'm not saying that if you relate to this that you are also a lesbian. I'm just saying that maybe if you relate to a lot of this, you should start thinking about it if you currently think you're straight. First off, there's something that I saw in a video where Anthony Padilla was interviewing Dan Howe about him coming out and how one of the hardest things for him when he was a kid is that gay was kind of just slang for bad. And it was like, that was almost harder in a way because you kind of knew that a lot of people around you had this negative association with gay, and it kind of almost makes you suppress that part of yourself before you really even fully recognize that it's there. And when I look back, I can obviously say, okay, yeah, these are signs, but I was so in denial because even though I thought I was very progressive, there was still a part of me that had this internalized homophobia that society had placed in me, where I was okay being gay. I just didn't want to present myself to the world as gay because I knew that that was going to impact my chances of success in my life. What I didn't realize was that if I didn't come out of the closet, it was basically going to make it impossible for me to be happy, but that's another story for another day. Another thing is, one of the biggest clues for me is that I was just always low-level depressed. Like, even when I hypothetically had everything going in life, I was in a good relationship on paper, I had a good job on paper, all of these other things, and I thought I had friends and I thought I had all of these things that I needed, I was very deeply in denial, and that was kind of making me be at a low level of depression. So I kind of always had the spicy sads my whole life. And it's weird because after coming out of the closet, it hasn't really changed my life that much because it's not like I'm out there like aggressively dating women or anything like that. I'm just presenting myself and I'm not having to do all of the work to live a lie anymore. And that has been so big, such a tremendous relief. And that low-level depression is really starting to subside for the first time that I can remember. And one of the big reasons why I'm not in a rush to go into a relationship is because I realized that this part of me that was against these queer relationships was a deeply damaged, traumatized part of myself. And if I try to put that part of myself into a relationship, it's just going to be bad all around. And when I was a teenager, all of the writers and artists that I was obsessed with were people like Oscar Wilde. They were all foppish, dandy, progressive, drug-addled, and queer. And I was just like, oh my God, I am so envious of them. That sounds like the life. And it's funny because a couple of months ago, I really sat down and thought about what my life is and what I'm doing with it and things like that. I'm like, oh, I'm living my Oscar Wilde fantasy that I never really realized. So my type when it comes to men has always been not any traits that are manly at all. So I like short men who are pretty, who often have a lot of feminine domestic traits. They're more compassionate, or they're more into cooking and cleaning and things like that. They do more of the female range of skills and things like that. I always love pretty eyes. I always love slim, muscular hands and long, slender fingers, especially if you have a skill that you do with your hands, if you knit or if you play piano or if something like that. Oh, that's just so hot. And bubble butts. Bubble butts. For most of my life, I was really singled out because people thought it was very weird that I liked short men. I've always liked a partner that was pretty close to my own height, regardless of their gender, just because it's easier for kissing and stuff. You're not leaning up or leaning way down to get to any of the fun bits, you know? When I played with Barbies as a kid, I did have Kens, but my Barbies would always steal the guns from G.I. Joe and then steal Ken's car and pop him, pew pew him, and then they would run off together. And I didn't know what scissoring was at the time, but I just had my lady girl Barbie dolls just all in naked and all parts and rubbing up against. I understood that there was something else vaguely happening there. This is like a really sad one. I never liked happy endings. I never believed in happy endings. I never saw happy endings for myself. A lot of the stories that I liked were stories that ended with one or both parties kind of miserable. I thought happily ever after, getting married and being happy with somebody, was a lie. And a big part of that was like the culture and things like that. They really make you feel like if you don't want to be a housewife and have kids and all of those things, that you're never going to find someone who loves you and cares for you and protects you and all of those things. And they really make it seem like you're going to be out on your own. You're not going to have a happy ending if you don't necessarily agree with the cis heteronormative like lens of the world. I have always really seen myself as having the Golden Girls life in the end. I've always kind of seen myself as ending up a widow. And this is awful, but there were some of my relationships where I kind of almost wish I was widowed. And it's not that I wanted the people that I was with to die. It was just, I knew that they were happy. I knew they were happy with me. I knew that I wasn't as happy with them. Obviously, they were men. They could not have delivered me really what I need, I don't believe. I just didn't want to hurt them. Because like I didn't go into relationships with any of these people because I hated them and I thought they were bad people and I wanted to manipulate them. A lot of the men that I dated were men who didn't date, who couldn't date, who had been hurt before, who had kind of shut off the whole dating thing, and they were very emotionally unavailable. And because I knew that I couldn't reciprocate that kind of an emotional connection the way I think a partner who wanted me would have. And one of the quickest ways that I got turned off relationships was when a partner started to want me, be interested in me, see a future in me, and then I felt trapped, and I didn't know why I felt trapped, and I didn't know what about the situation was wrong. And it was very maddening because a lot of these men were on paper really good partners and good companions, and it made sense. But in reality, I just couldn't bring myself. And like, it was everybody in my life, I think, was like, okay, not everybody that you dated was like a bad person who you can't see marrying. Like, some of the men that I dated were good people who are now happily married to wives that I assume appreciate them and things like that. I couldn't do that. A lot of times I dated broken men because I hoped they wouldn't want to do that. I hoped they wouldn't want to get to the phase. And a lot of times what would happen is I would kind of fix them, and then they would get to the phase where they were more emotionally available, and then I was like, no, honey, we can't do that. And I mean, I guess it worked out for them because a lot of them ended up marrying the next person that came along after me, but God, did it make me feel broken as hell for a long time. And I very often dated men who needed therapy, not a relationship. One of the first things that I can remember thinking about boys is when I was in early middle school and boys sweated, and like, everybody gets sweaty at the gym, and I get that boys, like, you know, especially teenage pubescent era, boys do not have a good smell, but it was like a visceral disgust of that smell that the other girls around me did not seem to share. Like, the other girls were like, ew, you're stinky, but then they would kind of be like, oh, it's so hot how he's sweaty, isn't he? Me, I would be like, I've always loved boobies. I think boobies are great. I thought boobies are incredible. I thought that this was a statement that literally everyone could agree with. There are a lot of hetero women out there who are just okay with boobies. Just, okay, I have boobies, that's cool. I don't want to play with other people's boobies. And I think this is another one of those American things where the culture is kind of made you to believe that boobies are some like all-powerful object that have control over you. But I do remember as a young girl that like teenage boys would always talk about how like, oh my God, I got caught staring at her tits, caught staring at her tits, and I'd be like, oh my God, because I struggle with eye contact as an ADHD person, so I like knew that a lot of times my eye contact was on the boobs for two reasons, because it allowed me to avoid uncomfortable eye contact and boobies, you know? I just remember feeling warm and fuzzy when girls were around, and I remember that me and a lot of my female friends would have this game where we would sit one in front of the other, and the person who was sitting in the back would use their finger to draw on the person in the front's back, and they would like draw a picture and you would guess what the picture was, or we would write messages and we would try to like guess what the message was and things like that. And I just remember getting very warm fuzzy feelings when I was doing that with the girls that I didn't feel with boys. And I think that was one of the first moments when I started to connect And this was obviously in the late 80s, early 90s. This was when like Gay and Lesbian and Ellen was starting to come out, and one of my friends had 2 moms, so I saw how some of the other kids at school had acted in regards to that. And it was that time that I realized that maybe that warm fuzzy feeling that I was feeling was not something that was good. And it sucks that like at such a young age that seed was planted in my head that was bizarre and deviant and aberrant behavior, such that it took me basically 40 years of my life to realize that that is what I am. When my friends started having crushes on boys, they would talk about the boys, and a lot of these boys were like brothers of our friends, kids that went to the all-boys school, because I went to an all-girls Catholic school, and they were people that we knew, and I didn't get crushes. So I thought that crushes were just like you picked which boy you thought was the best, and Princess Diana had just died and Prince William was in the news all the time, and I'm like, well, if I'm going to have a crush on a boy, I'm going to choose Prince William, because if I have to have a crush on a boy, I'm at least going to choose the best one. And I think on some unconscious level, I was really unwilling to date. And I really didn't date until it made me feel weird socially, because a lot of my friends had boyfriends. I didn't want to go to prom on my own. I couldn't have taken a girl to prom with me, although I probably would have had more fun at prom if I would have been able to take one of my female friends from when I went to public school. Because I knew I wasn't emotionally available, I almost exclusively dated men who were also emotionally unavailable, and thus a lot of times I ended up neglected, because whilst I wasn't in love with them, I was able to fall in love with the concept of us, the concept of our relationship, how good it looked on paper. A lot of times I was doing well at work and I was dating somebody else who was also doing well at their job, so it was kind of like an IT power couple thing. And some of those relationships were not explicitly beards, but I went into those relationships specifically looking for somebody who was into swinging or ethical non-monogamy, with somebody else who was a bisexual man who was closeted, who was also looking to have an openish relationship such that they can explore relationships and feelings with guys. And unfortunately, I kind of went into this idea thinking that I was going to be the only secret bi one, and I'm obviously, like, we were both coming into the whole scenario with false, like, impressions and, like, false goals and things like that. So I'm not going to try and pretend that I'm, like, a good person or anything like this, but what I did not expect was that these men were not going to be the type of men that are like, oh yeah, it's going to be so hot if my girl has sex with another girl. It's going to be guys who are desperate to be with guys but do not want to suffer the social consequences at work. A lot of these guys worked for companies that were more conservative. They worked in finance, they worked a higher end of IT, they were very boys club. There was very much an air of, if you had an attractive trophy wife on your arm, that you did better at work. And I knew I'm not a trophy. I'm a lesbian. Like, I'm not the trophy for any hetero man. So I understand why those relationships failed, but they were bad for me emotionally because I didn't really understand it. I think I also sought out femininity in men because I had so much internalized misogyny, and I recognized that I needed those traits, that the person that was for me is somebody who would be very caring, compassionate, nurturing. But also I noticed that a lot of the guys that I knew that had those traits reserved those traits for their guy friends and acted affronted when I needed anything emotionally, but that's another story too. I was always a little embarrassed to post a boyfriend or a love interest on Facebook, and I think a big element of that was just like not being fully committed to the relationship and wanting to keep my options open, because like my parents are not homophobic, but I had realized at a very young age that unless I was going to be in a serious long-term relationship with a girl, I didn't want to have to come out to them, because a lot of my extended family is homophobic. And when I was a teenager, one of my aunts used to send a bunch of homophobic, like, chain emails to my mother all the time on email. So I didn't want to put my parents in a position where they had to be at arms with the family or defend me against the family unless I was in a relationship that I really thought was worth it. When I dated men, I was primarily looking for guys who reminded me of myself, and this was before I realized like that I was bi and that I was more interested in a girl. This was more earlier on. I was always saying that I just wanted me just in male form, and I just always had this vague feeling that the guys that I dated weren't enough like me, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, Yeah, literally the only thing that we had that was different, like the gender, that's probably actually one of the things that mattered. I was so close to realizing the difference, so far away. When I was in a long-term relationship and living with a man, I would always have to be on like second shift, and he would be on first shift, so we wouldn't have to be together as much, because the idea of having a man around the house all the time is quite frankly stifling. I tolerate my father being around all the time, but I just frankly do not feel comfortable, especially with a man that's like wants me to have sex with him and to be affectionate to him, and like I get. Part of it is the fact that I'm a lesbian in a relationship that I shouldn't be in. And part of it is also just the nature of men feeling like they own women's bodies and things like that when they're in relationships. So me feeling like being in a relationship with a man was a total loss of my like autonomy and stuff like that. I was very jealous of gay people, like just in general. I was really jealous of like really effeminate, flamboyantly twinkish guys because of the confidence they had to be themselves, to pursue what they wanted to pursue, to stick out and be different, even if it may mean they get hurt and things like that. That is just a level of devotion and faith and acceptance of one's identity that I did not have until very recently. Until very recently, I wasn't able to deal with the idea of like, oh, I'm not going to hold hands with a girl in public. Like we might get our asses kicked and things like that. But now I realize like a lot of that was just me. The only girls that I was really dating when I was bi and closeted were girls on the side partners and things like that. So there was often different layers of why I was keeping it secret. And obviously, if I had a girlfriend today, I wouldn't be holding hands with her everywhere. Or if I had a non-binary friend, I wouldn't be holding hands with them everywhere. But I would want to be trying to do those things as many places as was safe. I think one level of me being like, I was really jealous of lesbians, and like I didn't really understand it at the time because I was bi. There's no like quantifiable lesbians are better than bisexual people or vice versa. Like that's not a thing that exists. The reason why I was so jealous of lesbians was because they were able to cut off the teat of cis heteronormativity. They were willing to be like, no, I am cutting off men. I don't want that support structure. I don't need that support structure. Whereas me, as a closeted bisexual, I was holding on to that safety teat for dear life because I was convinced that it was the safest alternative for me and the only alternative for me long term. Seeing Ellen come out when she did, and just seeing also a couple of other celebrities who came out like in the 80s and 90s, and then it was like public opinion turned on a lot of them, and people like Ellen didn't get a lot of opportunities for a while. She was very much desexualized. She didn't get the type of roles that she got when she was presenting as, as hetero, even though nothing about her and her acting ability and her comedy had changed. And sure, she did eventually be able to evolve into the role that she eventually had as a show host and as Dory and all of those things. But it took many years for her to fight to get back to that. And me being very interested and invested in having a very profitable career that would allow me to eventually have an easy life, because that's how I thought it worked here. I thought you worked really, really hard when you were young, and then you got to have an easy life when you're old, and that is not the case when you are an ADHD disabled lesbian working in IT. You work yourself basically to death in that scenario, and then you don't have anybody to share it with when you can't. And like my identity just as a whole is so confusing because I have both that like supportive parents thing, but I also have the unsupportive like extended family thing and the went to Catholic school thing. So a lot of times, because I knew my best friend had two moms, my mom was not going to like disown me. She might be a hair disappointed, but my mom wasn't going to disown me if I came out as a lesbian. So for many years, I felt like I couldn't have that trauma, that dealing with homophobia as a closeted queer trauma, because I thought like, well, my parents were accepting, but I didn't realize how much the acceptance of my whole community mattered. And there absolutely was a difference between coming out as bisexual and coming out as lesbian, in that a lot of men were only my friends because they hoped that one day they could hit it. There were a lot of men that I heard from fairly consistently up until literally the day that I posted I'm gay on YouTube, and then the contact ceased. But you know, I didn't need those men in my life anyway. I'm curious what things may have cued you all into the fact that you may have been gay. Did you learn anything about yourself watching this video? Even if you're 40s or older and you're just now starting to realize that you might be queer, it's cool. It's a great scene. There's tons of older folks here. There are not nearly as many older queers as there should be because of age and because of just the general lack of economic stability and resources for LGBT people, and the fact that our parents and families often just, you know, kick us out and all that jazz. That said, for every bad friend that I lost, I gained a much better, accepting friend who loves me for who I was, who loves me for who I am. I spent many years of my life trying to pretend to be somebody so that my people in my social circle would continue to like me and support me and be friends with me. And sure, there were absolutely people that I lost that I didn't want to lose, that it hurt to lose. But it allowed space in my life for people who know me, who get me, who support me, even if I am a total flaming homo, which I basically am. I'm just saying this here because I say it in all of my videos. I often say that I'm sapphic. I am attracted to feminine people, not females, so it's not one of those situations where I won't date somebody who's non-binary. And there even probably are men, especially trans men, who I would be willing to date because they have that nurturing, emotionally available facet of their personality that I need so much intact. But, and that's why I flip between lesbian and bi, and most of the time say sapphic, because I think sapphic pretty much cements what exactly I mean. I just wanted that to be clear because I tend to confuse people when I talk about these things in these videos. But yeah, I hope that helps somebody. Boom, fucka fucka.